How do you, what's with the Philadelphia Tribune? Hi, Stephanie. Nice to meet you.
So nice to meet you.
I'm excited to speak with you because one of my little gripes in doing this work has always been, where are our historical pieces? We did do things during this time other than be enslaved and have those stories. I'm just saying.
Oh
I'm
my
just saying,
God.
and once again, we learn about someone that seemed like we shouldn't know about, but we didn't.
Yep.
So tell me how you were roped into this and how did you go about your research? Because as you know, our history is not kept very well.
Yes, those are all great points, and I completely agree. And that was one of the things that motivated me to write the movie was that, I truly feeling or hoping and wishing that like that idea was true, that like we did other things than just live on a plantation, and we have a very rich history, and that I think is so true, and I think it's important to see that and to celebrate those people. And for me, the first time I read about Joseph Bologne was when I was about 15 or 16 years old. Um, I had read just like about him in a book that my mom gave me, and I was sort of like you, completely astonished even back then. Like, how come I'm not being taught about this guy, or how come nobody seems to know about this person? And how come when I talk about him or bring him up, no one has read about him, has heard his music isn't being played anywhere? And that felt frustrating to me. And then the older I got, when, I did more research, it was like, if people did refer to him, they referred to him as the Black Mozart, which I thought was horribly offensive and incredibly condescending. And he was one of those people I was just so enamored by. I just felt like, well, someone's got to either make a movie or tell his story or do something, like this. It's his life is too big to sort of be kept under wraps like this. So, I pitched the idea to Searchlight like 5 years ago, and here we are. It was something I just felt really passionately about. And then in terms of research, there was a lot of it. It was I read a lot of books, and some books, had conflicting information. I think even now, probably some of the things that I knew to be true about him have been proven either not to be true, or have been some of those shades have been filled in a little bit more. So there's, I think, a lot that we know about him, a lot that we don't know about him, and a lot that we're continually learning about him as a person.
I think as in anything, where do you like, well, how do you start? Because there was a beginning, and as we all know, that when it comes to us, it was the record keeping can be very interesting in terms of a beginning, especially when our ancestors are enslaved. We don't fall under the people category, we fall under the proper category. And then how are we described? We don't have a full name and necessarily a date of birth. So how did you go about, because in order for us to get to the meat of the story, we have to understand his beginnings. And obviously the interesting part, he is, how can I say this delicately? He's not a creation of love. He's a creation of power. And one person had the power and the other person didn't. And how do you go about having that delicate entrance? Because again, it's not like you can go and knock on the doors of relatives and be like, well, like, kids, I mean, I'm saying it tongue in cheek, but it's kind of like, because of the record keeping. So how did you work with like a geologist? Did you look at?
No, I mean there were, and it's interesting. I'll answer sort of in two parts. Just in terms of the actual research, there have been books written about him. So like, I mean, there have been scholars who have gone out of their way to try to piece together what his life was like. And certainly once he got to France, his life became way more documented, right? So it's like once he left Guadeloupe, which is where he was born, the French colony at the time where he was born. Um, uh, there wasn't so much information. And to your point, like the beginning of his life is kind of a mystery, or at least was when I first started doing the research. It was like, okay, he was born, you knew when he was born, you knew he was born to this nobleman, and we know all about the nobleman, the white nobleman who owned his mother, but we do know his mother was a slave. We know her name was Nanon, and probably a given name, probably not her actual name. We don't have a great sense of how old she was. We can guess, I think, that she was from Senegal. We don't know when she was kidnapped and brought to Guadeloupe. And we don't know how old she was when she had Joseph and was sort of forced into that relationship. So, to your point, that is just absolutely true. And I think a lot of Joseph's early life, we don't know really what his life on that plantation was like. Like, who taught him the violin? Was it someone else enslaved? Was it someone who wasn't enslaved that was it common for him to get lessons? We don't really know, or at least I didn't back then, what those answers were because of the exact thing that you're talking about. But I think it was also important to us to not, when we wrote the movie, or when I wrote the movie, we were shooting it, we went back and forth about like, well, how much do we show about Joseph's earlier life? And we had written drafts where we were on the plantation and we were watching him, sort of being ripped out of his community and put on a boat and gone to Paris. But I mean, to your point earlier, like, I just don't think that we needed to see that, or we wanted to show that. Like, we just didn't need to see more plantation, more hurt, more toiling, more abuse. And so the movie starts where it starts, I think, for a very intentional reason.
Which I think is good. I think the other part is that I think was really important in the film is to show the thriving Black community, that community. And again, they were not, obviously, were not considered equal, but they were living very fruitful lives. And because of his talent, he was moving within French society. He had a lot of liberties that most people in his station would not have had. Why was that important for you to show? Obviously the musical part, but also his lifestyle, for lack of a better word.
I think his lifestyle was important because it was like a manifestation, or it was a physical representation rather of what he was hiding from. It's all armor, I think, is what it was, or at least in the context of our movie, that's what we felt it was, is that, he did exceed and he was excellent, and the reason maybe for being excellent was to protect himself, in a way, so he could be accepted and so he could thrive. And I think that's what so many of us, Black successful people do, is that we throw ourselves into our work to become as excellent and as untouchable as possible. If we have enough money, if we have enough talent, if we have enough great connections, if we are good enough and we do the right thing, then we are untouchable. And that's just not true. So I think to see his lifestyle, to see how he was living, and to see that through excellence, he was allowed in the door, but how quickly that, can go away, was really important. And then to speak specifically about the thriving Black community in Paris, that from our own research seems like it was true, like that there were probably thousands of Black people living in Paris at the time, and were very much a part of the culture or had their own communities. And again, to what you said earlier, like, we weren't all just slaves. Like, we were living in cities, we were free. And actually in Paris, in mainland France, they outlawed slavery. So you couldn't be a slave if you weren't equal. You definitely were not equal, but you weren't working a plantation. You probably, worked as a maid or a service job. But all to say, it's like they were living in the city and were in their own communities more often than not. They were in homes, in the metropolitan Paris. So to show that part, and to show that that was accessible to him, and also to show our audience that, that was also truthful, I think was really important.
Well, I thank you for taking the time to speak with me today. I think it's really important because as someone who wasn't born in this country, I always say Black people are global, and we need to have more conversations about the Black experience outside of just North America. And hopefully this will inspire, during these interesting times, more people to learn about him and to, teach the music and all that.
Totally agree. It was so nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well.
Have a good one.